Yo, what's going on everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go discussion video. Okay, so this weekend we of course had Shadow Lugia in Shadow Raids, and a lot of players were going out trying to get this particular Pokemon because of the gameplay implications. It's not like Shadow Lugia is a top raid counter or anything like that, but this is a Pokemon that has a lot of significance, especially when it comes to PvP. So it was a highly valuable Pokemon, and players were hoping for possibly a shiny Shadow Lugia. But unfortunately, at the beginning of this weekend, we had a couple of issues that caused Shadow Lugia to not get subdued within the Shadow Raid, making it absolutely impossible for you to take it down. And yeah, this was something that a lot of players were complaining about. Some players lost out on a couple of raid passes, and of course Niantic responded as quick as possible. What they ended up doing was that they had it so Shadow Lugia would not enrage during the middle of the Shadow Raid, which would essentially nullify the issue because you would not need to subdue it. Now a lot of players were okay with this because for the remainder of the weekend while we had Shadow Lugia and Shadow Raids, players were able to take it down as long as they had enough trainers. But I do think this brings about a big pressing issue when it comes to Pokemon Go in general. It seems like Niantic is just not always getting their act together when it comes to releasing different content, and we always end up having different issues like this. And I do predict that there's going to be a makeup event for Shadow Lugia later on down the road, and it really has become a theme with Niantic and Pokemon Go, where they're going to make some sort of big mistake with the release of content, and then they have a makeup event down the road. And sometimes the makeup event works in players' favor, like recently with Mega Rayquaza. We of course had Mega Rayquaza Elite Raid Day, and a lot of players were not in favor of that, mainly because Elite Raids tend to be very unpopular, but also because there were a lot of issues. And then because of that, Niantic had a makeup event which was not an Elite Raid Day, and a lot more players were able to get Mega Rayquaza raids done as a result. So I really do think that for whatever could be the makeup event for this Shadow Lugia weekend, it's only going to be for certain trainers in certain areas that were affected the most, but I do think that Niantic really needs to make sure that all of the content that they release is in a polished state so that a makeup event is never necessary. I mean, let's be real here, for them to have this sort of pattern of having major issues and then having a makeup event down the road, that is such a bad look for the company as well as the game itself. Pokemon Go is not necessarily a polished game by any means. There's always a lot of different bugs and issues. I mean, recently we talked about all the issues with PvP, making it just completely unplayable. I really do think that Niantic does need to take a step back and polish up their game. I think they need to make sure Pokemon Go is in a good state and there's not so many bugs and glitches. I mean, Pokemon Go players are essentially at this point all veteran players. There's very few new players joining into Pokemon Go, and because of that, Niantic needs to make sure they're giving us a polished state of the game, because for a lot of people who have been playing this game for a long time, they've been seeing the same issues in the game for the past several years, and it's making the game seem very dull at this point. Like, I think at this point there's a lot of people who want to try out PvP, for example, but they just refuse to do so because the gameplay is just in such a glitchy state. And I think the same could go for stuff like Shadow Raids. Like with Shadow Lugia, the fact that some players around the world were not able to subdue it because, you know, of some whatever bug or issue that was causing that, I think this is what Niantic needs to really buckle down and figure out, because it just seems like it's constant. Every single week there's some sort of new bug or glitch, and then the following weeks we get a makeup event, and it's really tiresome. It's really cumbersome at this point as a longtime Pokemon Go player. You would think at this point they would have figured it out by now. Like, I really do not know what the issue could be. So yeah, ultimately what it comes down to, I'm really disappointed that Niantic has once again dropped the ball with something that was supposed to be really hype. I mean, ultimately, maybe it did kind of work out in players' favors. I mean, one of the big drawbacks of Shadow Raids is the whole subduing mechanic behind it. Personally, I actually really enjoy it. I think it adds a little bit of a dynamic flavor to these raids. It kind of separates them from regular 5-star raids. And I really do think that for Niantic, they need to make sure these mechanics work if they want to actually push them out to the Pokemon Go player base. Like, if they want to make Shadow Raids completely unique with this whole subduing feature, then they need to make sure that feature actually works. Otherwise, players will not buy it. They will just simply not buy into it. They'll just completely disregard it. They'll just think that Shadow Raids are just another gimmick. and the rewards are not going to be substantial enough where players are going to think it's worth it. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of players who lost out on raid passes. And then at this point, I really think all Niantic needs to do is just make sure their game is polished. Then they're gonna have a lot more players on board with all of the stuff that they are releasing. I think Shadow Raids are really cool, don't get me wrong. I think they were a great addition to Pokemon Go. I mean, ever since they were released into the game, I think they added a new flavor to raiding, and I really do like the mechanic that they have with subduing enraged Pokemon. I think it's very interesting and definitely makes you strategize very differently. But at the same time, I also feel like for Niantic to get more players on board, they need to make sure these features are polished up. I mean, by the looks of it, they're going to be releasing a lot of new and interesting content in the near future. Like, we're going to be getting Gigantamax and Dynamax Pokemon really soon. And we're getting a new kind of points of interest as well that's related to all of that. And if it's all a buggy mess, like if it doesn't work, if it doesn't have all of the polish that we're looking for, then players are going to not find it interesting. Players are not going to get hyped up behind it. Instead, they're going to focus on the negatives. And that tends to be the case with everything that Niantic does. Look at routes, look at party play. A lot of that stuff could have been really cool for Pokemon Go, but as of right now, it's kind of an afterthought. And the reason for that is because at the time those features were released, they were just not polished up. They were a buggy mess. And sure, Niantic has done a lot of work to improve those systems over time, but at the end of the day, players are only going to focus on the negatives, and that's a reality that Niantic needs to understand. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. I just wanted to share my thoughts regarding this whole debacle with Lugia Shadow Raids, and yeah, I'm really curious to see what the Pokemon Go community is thinking about. If you have any thoughts regarding this whole thing, then definitely share that down below. I would like to know what you are thinking, and yeah, let's have a great discussion regarding all of it. And thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you ended up enjoying it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And real quick, let me give a shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Jinsula channel, the absolute best way you could do so is by joining my Patreon. If you become a paid Patreon member, you get a permanent spot on my in-game Pokemon Go friends list. So when it comes to stuff like remote raids and the friendship system, if you want to play Pokemon Go with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel in a different way, you could always do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula. I'm on the platforms that you see on screen. Make sure you go over there and give me a follow. And that's going to be it for this video. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.